Welcome to Beyond the Political Spin, your weekly dose of politics, economics, common sense, and things that matter. No lefties, no political correctness, no agenda, no bullshit, and absolutely no political spin. Here's your last line of defence for common sense. Adrian Aiello, Vince Lochisano, and Richard Stockman.
Welcome back to the podcast, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
G'day.
It's a nice day today. Enjoying it in the office.
It's a lot nicer than outside. Actually,
That's okay. Nice and warm.
it's not a bad day. It's been a bit warm recently. A bit of Queensland air coming down.
Gets you up and about. Good thing.
Even the air was prohibited from entering Queensland from New South Wales. So the air's been pushed back from the Queensland border and back towards Victoria. So we're getting a bit of Queensland weather down here.
So as we follow up on the last podcast, which was named the Accidental Podcast because it did kind of just happen on the
By
fly.
accident.
I want to kind of give people a little objective as to what we're trying to do here. Mm-hmm. So maybe take us through that, Vince. We spoke about it before, the whole point of this podcast.
Well, I guess the whole point of it is to discuss political issues, whether they be federal, state, or even local issues, in a manner that most of us can understand, that the layperson can relate to, and to try and sift through all of the political spin and actually say it as it is, and apply a bit of common sense to it all, and I guess express our own views about what's really going on, whether it be in the country, in our state, or any other state or territory.
Yep.
And also our local council. So, Richard, of course, you're going up for election in the Nillumbik Shire council elections very shortly.
That's right, Vince, and I agree with what you say there. We just want to take away any spin whatsoever. So just, to the common people, and it's what's good for us is what's good for everybody.
Yeah, I think it is. It's a good opportunity to, I think we've all seen, whether it's social media or interactions with friends and family, that there is a kind of a common lack of, I wouldn't say education, but, information regarding governments and economics and
I think it's a bit difficult for the average person to try and understand or even have an interest in politics. A lot of people haven't even got an interest in it because they either don't understand it or it's expressed to them in such political spin by our political leaders and ministers and people like that they just don't relate to it. So they basically lose interest, and some of this stuff is very important in the future direction of their lives.
And I think it's the economic side as well that we want to,
of course,
kind of focus on, because that's, at the end of the day, that's what affects our back pocket. As hardworking Australians, that's what's going to affect us, our future, whether it's 5, 10 years, 20 years from now. And especially now, actually, I think we're in a position as a state and as a nation where if we don't care and people don't kind of wake up and get informed,
we'll wake up one day and we'll have a very different life.
We're going to be in strife. So I think the times are gone where people used to disregard economics and politics and think, it's just a game of a bunch of dickheads and, I've got no interest there. Who cares? Doesn't affect me. Well, now's the time to get involved because it is going to affect everyone. So,
economics right now is going to affect us more than climate change will at the moment.
Well, absolutely. So focusing on that, I think, is quite important. And, we have seen that there's a lot of people, and by no fault of their own, people just aren't interested. So if we can touch on certain issues and get them to understand the reasons behind their voting when it does come time to vote. Because, I've been guilty of it when I was younger. It's very hard these days, and it has been for so long, to find a politician that you can say, I want him to represent me in my future.
What would be an interesting exercise is how many votes are cast out there on the basis of a really educated point of view.
Yep.
And that doesn't mean that they have to vote the way I think. It means that they're actually making up their minds of which way they want to vote based on real understanding of the facts.
Yep.
Versus how many people vote because, that guy's hairstyle looks like an idiot, so I'm not going to vote for him, or that woman looks like she's nicely dressed, I'll vote for her.
Sensationalism too. Like, you heard the big thing like Mediscare come out. Like when we look at health and when we look at climate change, people jump on that, and they've been jumping on that, protesting for a while. But the economy, it is an emergency.
It is an emergency. And again, we've touched on the aesthetics, and I think it's time, as we said, beyond the political spin is such a crucial kind of.
And it'd be good to get some comments after these podcasts from people out there that might be listening, and if you've got a point of view you want to put across, by all means.
Yeah, and we'll discuss it. But it is, as I was saying, the political spin is so important now to get beyond, because these aesthetics that they all,
Adrian,
hide behind.
Ace, why are we stuffed? Just tell us why it's an emergency. Why are we stuffed at the moment, and what do we have to do?
We're stuffed because we've been forced into a position as not only a nation, but it's now a time where Victoria is creating additional strain and unnecessary strain, I think, on the national economy. Now, we all know we've been following statistics, and as the nation knows and has seen, well, people all around the world have seen, the measures taken in Victoria, some will say are very unnecessary, and I think a lot of them are. But we need to understand what this means for us in 2 years' time, 5 years' time, and even 20, 30 years' time, because the amount of debt we're falling into because of the amount of handouts we're being given is going to create problems later on. And it comes, we touched on it last week a little bit, but there is so many aspects of our life that are going to be affected by this. And it's because they have to get the money back somehow. So, these funds have to be recouped through whether it's land tax for Victorians. Right? We're the hardest hit. There's no doubt about it. We are not only the hardest hit here as Victorians, but we're dragging the rest of the country down. The cost on the national economy, even just with border closures, where the consequences are going to be are in things like that. You've got whether there's certain categories that fall under Medicare at the moment that start to get cut back, waiting period. It might be that not life-threatening, but you've got an elderly lady. Let's just say we've got an elderly lady suffering from a chronic knee injury, right? Or she needs a knee replacement. And my 92-year-old auntie, this happened to her 3 years ago. She waited 2 months, straight into the public system, had her surgery. She's good as gold. Now she's 93 years old. Now, when the economy is suffering so badly that we need to make these healthcare cuts, what happens to these elderly people that the government keep telling us about that's at the forefront of their minds? Forefront of their minds now. But in 5 years' time, when this poor elderly woman is waiting 5 years to get that knee operation, she's got 5 years of agony. And that's if she survives that long. This is where the damage comes into effect later down the track. And that's just one example. And the difference between a third world country and a country like Australia is that big thing we call the economy. That is the one difference between a third world country and a first world country like Australia.
100%.
And people need to understand that, because the disregard I've seen where, and I understand we all have hearts and we're all compassionate and, I'd rather one more day with my grandmother absolutely, we all would. No one wants the most vulnerable, and it's not just the elderly, it's people that are vulnerable. There's children with chronic illnesses that, we all want to protect these people. But there has to be a balance between protecting them today from a virus that, in my opinion, can't be labelled as lethal, because we've seen where there's many other health crises in the world that can be labelled as such. But, there has to be a balance between protecting them today and protecting the livelihoods in 5, 10, 20, 30 years' time.
And looking at the mentality of people, and I don't think they want to bite the hand that feeds them. So they look at the government. So the state government's the one that gives them handouts and feeds them. But what feeds the government? And then you're talking about the economy. That feeds the government. So
absolutely,
if that dries up, that you're saying that the hand that's going to feed the general public is going to go as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's everything, because it's a domino effect. So, you've got healthcare cuts, and there's cuts to education, which cuts to education are so dangerous, because what seems to be an 8-year-old child today is one day going to be that very politician that is fronting the media on a daily basis. So
right now we get addressed on social media by the Premier every day, and he gives us numbers. But he doesn't seem to address the economy and saying how bad that is.
Because that's what they don't want you to know. Mm-hmm. They want everyone to feel good, because what they want you to hear is a $3 billion support package for business. They don't want you to hear that, it's going to take us how long to pay that back? And the reason why we have to offer this $3 billion support package is because we're in the strictest of lockdown measures in the entire world. Right?
When you look at the COVID figures worldwide and you look at Victoria's figures in comparison to every other place in the world which has had lockdowns and that sort of thing, it's not a scratch. To be locked down the way we are on the figures that we've got and how many people are actually in hospital and how many people are in ICU, it is an overreach. An overreach is just such an understatement to have not only put us in lockdown, but to actually impose a curfew on people. Yeah. It is madness to have done this to the Victorian people.
Yeah, and they're measures,
especially Melburnians.
They're measures to see around the world in places of
people around the world
are
saying, why are these people under lockdown with such small numbers in comparison to places in Spain and Italy and Brazil and India and all these sorts of places? Some of them are not even under lockdown measures the way we are.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just such a draconian way of going about it, and yet, in my opinion, there's a massive agenda behind the whole thing. It's got nothing to do with health. It's got nothing to do with spreading the virus. It's got nothing to do with deaths.
It's all a political agenda.
It's all a political agenda. And if you look at it through this lens, Adrian, I guarantee you everything starts to make sense, because people have been asking the question, why is Daniel Andrews doing this? What is motivating him to impose the world's strictest lockdown and for the longest period of time, including a curfew? What's driving this?
Yeah.
I'll tell you the lens to look at it through, and it all starts to make sense.
I reckon I can guess a bit too. But,
Okay, do you want to have a guess? Go.
Well, what's hurting the most? I think businesses, you're saying it, Adrian, business is getting hurt the most, big time.
So
And,
why would he do that?
well, who knows?
Well, there's one thing that gets in the way. There's one thing that gets in the way of a communism, and that's capitalism.
Yep.
The small to medium business, people, private-owned businesses, is the one very thing that gets most.
Are we on the right path here, Vince?
You're on the right path. The whole basis for the existence of the Labor Party. And the Labor Party is there as a political vehicle to advance the cause of the union movement.
Of course.
You look at everything that Daniel Andrews does, and you look at it through the lens of why is this benefiting the unions as opposed to private enterprise or corporations or medium and small business, then it starts to make sense. Everything makes sense. It then starts to make sense as to why council workers can go out and do gardening on council land, and yet Jim's Mowing can't go and do your front garden, right? Everything is for the benefit of public sector unions. And it's about time that the Victorian people and the Melburnians especially woke up to this and started to realise that everything that this guy does is for the benefit of the public sector unions.
Taxpayer-fed public sector.
And to destroy they don't care about small and medium business. They don't get union fees out of it. In fact, it's better for them if you're out the way. And that's why they're using this so-called pandemic, which is not a pandemic. It's a joke to call it a pandemic. If you look at the numbers, right? If you look strictly at the facts, take all the emotion out of it. Look at the facts. How many people are allegedly infected? How many people are allegedly in hospital because of the virus and not through any other sickness that they've got? How many people are in ICU, again, because of the virus and not because of anything else they've got? Look at all of those figures, and it is ridiculous to call it a pandemic. And yet they're jumping on this thing to lock us all away, take away our freedoms, take away our liberties, crush small and medium-sized business. Why? So that everyone that benefits is either employed by the government or their livelihoods revolve around this government. And that comes down to the unions, public sector, government bureaucracies, and they're the only people that are smiling. In fact, not only are they guaranteed their jobs, they're getting a pay rise at the same time.
Yeah, of course.
And stuff everyone else.
But it's almost an unstoppable movement, because
it is. It makes me sick.
They're guaranteed voters, and this is why they increase the sector so heavily.
It's a huge movement.
It's been tripled. It's been tripled in 6 years.
And Spin as well backs it up, and media backs it up. And I think, don't quote me on the exact figures, but I think we're 0.098% of the population has passed away with COVID. 0.098%. That's what I believe the number is now. We get the Spin. It says, "Oh, you're heartless." That's a person. It is a person. No? We've still got whatever it is, 800 deaths.
But protect the by all means. I'm not saying don't protect the elderly. by all means, protect them, protect the sick, protect all of the people that are vulnerable, that if they get this virus, it could really harm them or potentially even kill them. By all means, do whatever has to be done. Aged care, let's go out of our way. Federal government, state government.
You can't crucify the economy either.
No.
And this is where I think,
some balance. We need some balance.
We need balance, and that's what the call for. It is balance because, again, it's yes, we want to protect these people. Of course, we want to protect these people. We don't want to see another death.
No.
But people have to understand we're blind if we think that this disaster isn't going to continue on for years and years.
Does that mean if there's a little outbreak in January, we're all under lockdown again?
This is what I'm saying. We're blind if we think this disaster isn't going to carry on for years and years as a result of the overspending from the Victorian government, right? And the spending from the federal government, right? Because we've had some massive spending through this crisis. And yes, we needed the lifeline. I'm one of them who now has. I've watched my livelihood, my business that I've built up. I've watched it crumble to the ground. But we need to get out of the mess. There's got to be a balance because the vulnerable people that we're trying to protect here are the ones who are going to be even more vulnerable and more affected by the weak economy that we're going to see in 5-10 years' time, because those cuts we spoke of before are going to affect them more than other Australians. The ones that have the money, the top end of town, well, they're pretty much immune because they're going to have the funding to cover their health, to cover their education.
Doesn't mean they're not affected.
Right? No, they're affected. What I'm saying is that they're more immune to the aftermath.
Well, this is going to hurt.
Right? It's the ones that are vulnerable
because they might have more cash reserves or more assets to fall back on. Yeah,
because what happens when you're leaning less on the government and the economy for support, you lean on your own bank account. So the ones that have the funds available, well, of course, they're more immune than people like you and I who right, we do flash that magic green Medicare card around when we go to the doctors because it's a privilege that we all take advantage of.
Well, I want to jump in there and I want to just say that when there are cuts that are made, which they're going to be needed to be looked at, all our expenditures, and then all of a sudden this is where Liberals come in and we look like the heartless people trying to bring some cuts back. And you've got to be very careful on what you cut, and as you said there, I think the elderly, health, and that's priority. So the other things that get cut, and you watch who gets blamed. When things get cut, it's the Liberals that get blamed. It happens
because they have to administer the medicine, okay? Because inevitably they take over a complete mess, a financial disaster created by their predecessors, and that's usually always the Labor Party, with or without the Greens' assistance, and they have to administer the medicine. So the Labor Party says, let's have a party, right? But at the same time, we're racking up debt like crazy. Okay, we'll spend on this and spend on that and spend on every other thing. And then when they get voted out, when it all gets out of control, it's up to the Liberal Party to fix it. Yeah, so they have to put in the so-called unpopular measures. And the first thing the Labor Party does is criticise them for imposing those taxes or cutting back on government expenditure because they've got to cut back on government programs.
History does speak for itself.
Well, state, we're in big trouble, Victoria, but let's even look at federally. We're in good hands. Frydenberg, can he be like a Costello? You think, Vince, you rate Costello?
Potentially. I think Costello is the greatest treasurer this country's ever had.
I agree. I think there's...
And you know why I say that? It's got nothing to do with personality and it's got nothing to do with which political party. But just coincidentally, he happens to be from the Liberal Party. And why? Because the Liberal Party is a party that more often than not stands for doing things within your means as a government. And no one did that better than Costello. He delivered, I think it was 10 out of 11 years. His first year was a deficit because he took over the programs that the previous government had already had going. So he was almost, resigned to the fact that year was going to be a deficit. Every other year after that, he delivered surpluses. And that not only paid off all of the government's debt, there was zero national debt by the time they got voted out. He also put hundreds of millions in a kitty for a rainy day, for times like this that we're going through. Can you imagine if he was still in charge 13 years later and we would have had a massive kitty to be able to pay for a lot of this stuff that we're having to spend now?
So, Adrian,
that's what it's all about.
All right, but how are you going to do it? How are we going to do it on a state level? How are we going to do that? How are we going to
Well, you need to throw out this government straight away.
And again,
because they've tripled the debt here in Victoria.
We may come across as, really right wing with strong opinions, but
Common sense,
and I
Adrian.
think this is where exactly that it's common sense, right? And whether Dan
not
Andrews,
right-wing
we
at
are
all.
bashing Dan Andrews, and there's no doubt about that. But for every right, now whether he was a Liberal member, a Greens member, or as he is a Labor member, that is totally irrelevant. What he is doing to Victoria, he is on a mission to totally destroy our economy, right? And it is dangerous. And for anyone who does care about their future, it's time
their children's future.
and their children's future and their grandchildren's future. It's time to wake up and understand what is actually going on here, because it is so dangerous. It's scary. I tell you what.
Well, I'll give one example. This is on the council level. So the council where I'm running now, in the ward that I'm running for, there was the biggest this recently, the biggest ever expenditure on one project in the council history, which happened to be $16 million. It got funded from various different areas, and it was to fix up the basketball courts and so. Now, the same councillor who's approved that through, which is a great thing for people who love basketball and a few sports, but when money's tight, he's actually voted for a rate increase. So, don't freeze rates. So, I mean, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, aren't you? What's more important? That $16 million that went there. This is council we're talking, so not those big $1 billion figures we're talking about. But, I mean, that's sort of smart management, isn't it? How's it going to help the people? And you're talking
the handouts have to stop somewhere. The economy can't run on handouts, and Labor's been known for that over history. Is putting Victoria on the credit card, right? But it's just not sustainable. How do you do that? When does the debt get paid? Right? When does this debt? That's what I want to know.
They kick the can down the road and let someone else worry about it.
It's one thing to give the handouts. What I want to hear is what is the plan to pay off this debt? Right? Because all we've heard for 6 months, 7 months, is you can have this. We're going to give you this. You can have this. We need to open up the doors.
I think we're trying to simplify politics a little bit, and let's simplify it by taking it into a household, for example. And you've got one person in the household spending all the money, and the other person saying there's got to be some cuts. Well, there's only to get the debt down. There's two things you can do: get more money in, or put in some cuts, or cut back some of the spending and the wasted spending. When I say wasted spending, you're going to get in trouble there because you're going to offend somebody when you make a cut. I know people will spin that around that you're affecting education, a certain way, or like Jeff Kennett. How do you rate Jeff Kennett, Vince?
Well, again, I rate Jeff Kennett as one of the better premiers this state has ever had.
A lot of people don't like him because he made a few cuts.
I understand that. This is not a popularity contest, and I've said it before, and I'll say it again. We should not be judging our politicians on their look or their sound or their hair or anything like that. It should be based on what they do and their performance, and there should be a report card on every government, and let the people see what that report card says, and that should be independently produced, okay? Because you can assess a government's performance based on facts, numbers. What's the debt when you started? What's the debt when you finished? Okay, what did you promise before the election? What did you deliver? What did you not promise before the election and imposed on everybody during the course of your term that no one even knew you were going to do? Okay? Because a lot of governments do that. They don't even tell you what their real agenda is. They'll do it once they get in.
How's the Andrews report card looking at the moment?
Oh, don't get me started.
Well,
look, the one thing you can excuse is that no one knew back in November 2018 that we were going to have a so-called pandemic that was going to require state of emergency, state of disaster.
Just fast track. All this has done is fast track his agenda.
Well, exactly. They've pounced on it
been a perfect
as a great opportunity to impose what they really want to do, and that is create this so-called socialist utopia to please all of these wackos that come out of university that want capitalism to stop tomorrow, defund the police, have a lawless society, open up all the borders to any Tom, Dick and Harry that wants to come from whatever war-torn country and just come over here as you please, and it's all on the taxpayer, right? That's the sort of socialist utopia they want to create here. Now, this has got to stop, and someone has got to start standing up for these people, the real people, the quiet Victorians
we want
that
a
go about our business every day.
We want a better community, and talking about the war-torn countries, that's a good one, because I don't actually blame the people from the war-torn countries. They probably want to come here, but you don't bring them here and then just expect them to fit in society. And, I actually it's got to be managed much better. You know, we do have a heart, and what we say, if we're going to bring people in from countries that are violent and so forth,
yes.
well, you've got to really see how they fit in. The same thing with the growth in Melbourne. You don't just build growth areas and don't put in infrastructure. You've got to have a plan, don't you?
You do.
Well, the problem is a lot of them get here and they're bought by the certain political parties, given every benefit under the sun and told who to vote for. And we know that by there's certain.
By the way, guys,
certain areas around Victoria that are dominated by certain parties, and it's for that reason.
I want to give you some figures that to me are scary. Every state and territory has a government in place now that is carrying a debt burden in each and every state. So there's not one state or territory that's not in the red. And the country itself on a separate national level is also in a massive amount of debt. We know that through this period of time now that national debt is going to start approaching $1 trillion amongst our little population of 25 million people. Not only have we got that debt, separate to that debt, Queensland is now up to $90 billion on its own. Victoria, which less than 2 years ago had a debt of around $25 billion, is up to $75 billion thanks to this government. New South Wales is at $39 billion. South Australia, $30 billion. Northern Territory, which is almost basically gone bankrupt, $8.2 billion. The ACT is up at around $5 billion, and Tassie's at $2.5 billion. Now, where does it all stop? Where does it all stop?
I've found scary for a while is South Australia, given the size of South Australia, to have a debt almost equal to New South Wales is scary.
Well, again, in fairness, right, the Marshall Liberal government in South Australia, which only one government, I think, about 2 years ago at the most, they took over after something like, how many years was it? Was it 17 or 18 years of Labor government?
Yeah.
Now, they're the ones that racked up the majority of this debt.
Oh, again, history speaks for itself.
Okay, so again, they're in almost that Jeff Kennett style of we've got to administer the medicine, we've got to rein it back. Now, all of these economic times that we're in now is going to make it almost impossible for any government, state or federal, Liberal or Labor, to actually run surpluses at the moment. It's almost impossible. They're all going to be running at massive deficits over the next year or 2 or 3. So can you imagine what these debt figures are going to balloon to in the next 5 years?
That's astronomical. We're talking about the cost of the economy. So I just want to touch on a couple of things. So obviously we want to educate the layman, someone who might not have taken interest in the past. So the crucial things we touched on, healthcare and even the economic strain on people. So these elderly and vulnerable people, what happens when you've got a massive amount of jobs lost, people fighting for a livelihood, things like health insurance, that's the first thing to go, right? So you're going to have a lot of people left even more vulnerable based on things they can't afford.
And that's what they don't tell you.
That are so important to many people's lives, right? Whether you've got chronic illnesses, whatever it may be, these are things that keep them going. They're the first things that are going to go out the window because the cost of them is huge, right? Even at the best of times. So, again, that's something else that affects those elderly and vulnerable people that we're told every day that these lockdown measures are intended to protect. Right? We then go on. You've got the closure of businesses, which I know I know a lot of people that have now shut the doors forever, which breaks my heart. You walk through the shopping centre and you see these vacant shops that have just, you can see they've done a runner in recent weeks. And I can't help but walk through and think of all the families, of all the children, of all the food on the table that comes from the employment as a result of these businesses being open and now are shut, nowhere to be seen. What happens to that? Right, and they're tax-paying businesses who then in turn support the economy. When the economy runs out of taxpayers and small to medium businesses that pay majority of the tax, don't forget, I think it's estimated 9 out of 10 people in the country are employed by private small to medium business. right?
They are.
9 out of 10 people employed by small to medium business. That's massive. How that can be totally disregarded by the Premier in Victoria is
That's like having
totally
a car and saying, I'm not going to pay attention to the engine.
Totally beyond.
Because small and medium-sized business is the engine room
Absolutely
of the
they
economy.
are.
But that's what he's doing. He doesn't care. All they care about is what's in it for the unions.
There is
That's
no regard for it. Every time it's brought up, it's, we get the same bullshit spin about the dangers of COVID-19 and the amount of people that are vulnerable and how many deaths. It's hardly a pandemic, as we said before. Right? If you look up history and see pandemics that have happened over the history of the world.
Oh, but Adrian, I mean, look, with these numbers, we're still not safe. We don't want to open up too early. I mean, if we open up too early, then we'll have a third wave, and no one wants that. No. Let's get this right. Let's cut through the spin,
deaths,
right? That's
deaths.
what this program's about.
If we want to talk deaths, let's talk about, again, a country with no or a very weak economy. Talk Asia, for instance, right? Those people, you're talking suburbs. Over there, you're talking villages. You've got people living in villages that have no support from the economy because they can't. Right? The economies are so corrupt and broke that there is no support for the average Joe Blow. Whether it be a life-threatening illness, cancer or whatever it is, what happens to them? There's no support, no public healthcare system like we have Medicare, where, if you're diagnosed today, you go in tomorrow, you get treated, high priority, and you get fixed, hopefully. In those countries with these poor economies, you're left to die. If you don't have the $250,000 to come up with, goodbye.
The scary thing for us,
Good night, Irene.
the scary thing for us is that we're heading in that direction.
We are, but this is, again, the whole point of this discussion and podcast is I just want people to understand. I've had strong views on social media too, and it's not about having a win. It's about I'm standing up for what I think is right, and I think everybody's entitled to do that.
Because you care about the economy,
but with reason. And I just want people that may not be informed to try and.
There
become
are too many
informed,
people who are apathetic about all this.
Yeah,
and a lot of them it's because it doesn't affect them, because they're employed by the state government, or they're a bureaucrat, or a public servant, or they're a tradie who's employed by the unions to go and do this job and do that job because it's a government funded project or whatever it might be. You got to have surely part of you that says it interests me as to what's in the best interest of my state and my country, because if all you do is just say, oh no, I'll keep voting them in because it suits me, even though it's trashing the rest of the state, what sort of a person are you if that's the attitude that you have? I'd like to think that the majority of people would now vote on reflection of everything that's happened, especially in the last 6 months, based on what's in the best interest of Victoria, in their opinion.
Yep.
And we get silence. Like we're really, really silenced, apart from us here. But we get silence. Like, where's the money coming from? Who are we going to have to pay back? Now, paying back, and I've mentioned a bad word before talking about nuclear power, but talking about Chinese, right? You mentioned that. I've already been called a racist a few times because I mentioned the word Chinese. I don't know where they get that from. I'm just stating the fact that we've talked last week or week before in the last podcast that we've leased the bay for 50 years. I mean, Darwin's done the same with the airport. So all this, look, a business, Adrian, if a business needs some money and capital to operate, so you might go on a little bit of debt, but then you accumulate other things. The business is worth X amount. We're in debt, but we're also selling off our assets as well.
We are.
Who do we owe money to?
He has sold the soul of Victoria.
Well,
there's no other way to put it. We've sold
this is what I mean.
We've leased the Port of Melbourne for 50 years. I think that was $14 billion.
This is what I mean by
Darwin. We sold.
We need to have a very easy to understand. Not too detailed. Just get the real gutsy meat and potato issues on black and white for the average person to understand. No political spin. No, this is great and that's bad. Just the facts. Yeah. Our debt was this. Our debt is now that.
Yeah. But people
how many people in the public service was 20,000 people in 2014? Now 60,000 people employed. We just need to know the bare facts. Let us make up our minds as to whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And I just think that there's too much spin, and the media. Don't get me started on this media because they are in my opinion, they ought to all hang their heads in shame outside of Sky News, because Sky News is the only service that presents both sides of the equation. Most of the other media does not, especially our publicly funded ABC. Okay, they are a left-wing Trojan horse propaganda machine.
That needs to
full
happen.
stop.
They
And
need to
anyone who
have-
wants to argue with me on that is a dickhead
Yeah,
and doesn't know what
I
they're
agree.
talking about.
They need to have every dollar,
Right? It's
every
bullshit.
dollar of their funding cut.
Well, seriously, if they're not going to be balanced, sell it off.
Yep.
As far as I'm concerned.
No, I totally agree.
Couldn't care less. It's no use to anyone.
Just-
And if you look at it day to day, wall to wall ABC, there are that many left wing issues that they keep going on about. I'll tell you one thing about the ABC. There's not one person I have ever heard in the last 4 years say one kind word about Donald Trump.
Yep.
Not one. Everything that they report on with him is designed to ridicule him, make him look bad. Even the commentary from the reporters who are meant to be reporting on things have got their own little opinion thrown in about Donald Trump, and it's always in the negative. Okay? Now, I don't care whether you support Donald Trump, don't support Donald Trump. There should be a balanced view. Both sides of the equation. Let the person make up their own mind as to whether he's any good or whether he's bad. But all they do is try and manipulate the public's mind that this guy is an idiot because we think he's an idiot.
Well, it's a real
All right?
left
And I'm
agenda.
sick of the brainwashing that goes on through the media.
That's a left agenda of being a bully as well. You know, they claim about bullying being a bad thing, but I think Donald Trump is no one bullies him more than the left side of the media.
Oh, he's bullied more than any politician in the world.
And by the way, there's one other left-wing propaganda machine that exists in this state, which is even more dangerous than the ABC. It's called the Victorian Police farce, okay? Because that organisation there, especially their police command, when I looked at and listened to the press conferences by that Assistant Commissioner Luke Cornelius, he ought to hang his head in shame. He is expressing his opinion of people who've got every right to protest about what they want to, and he's calling them the tin foil hat brigade and all this sort of thing. And yet, when there's another group of people who want to protest about Black Lives Matter, oh, that's fine. We understand how you people feel. You can go and protest as much as you like. The double standards that exist in the state of Victoria are sickening to my core. I can't stand it. I don't think that people should be protesting right now either. But if you're going to let the Black Lives Matter people do it, why don't you let everyone do it?
And can I put a hypothetical? It'd be interesting tomorrow if there was a Black Lives Matter protest. That would be really interesting to see what would happen.
I'd love to see it happen. You know why? Because it will really test Victoria Police and the Andrews government on their stance on it. Because for the last 2 or 3 weekends, they've come out with riot gear, for goodness sake. I mean, they've outnumbered the amount of people that are actually protesting.
Yeah.
It's a joke. And anyone who doesn't see that, the hypocrisy, the double standards that exist, thanks to our government and our Victorian police force, well, they're not looking at it through the right lens. And thanks to those three morons in the state parliament who sided with the government to give Daniel Andrews another 6 months of state of emergency, you can thank them for it as well. You idiots.
And people are way too blind if they think that this is not the start of a dictatorship.
It is. It is. People go on about, Carl, you're overdoing it, Dictator Dan. No, we're not overdoing it. Because when you look at what he's doing, it is all Stalinist.
Yeah.
It is all the same stuff that Stalin did back in frickin' Russia. Okay? It's curfews, it's lockdowns, and it's we're coming after you if you don't agree with us. And if we even hear that you've got an opinion that's anti-government, we're going to come after you. Now, if this is what Victoria is going to become, God help us. We need to get rid of this government while there's still a democracy left.
Yeah.
Well, anyone who votes for this government at the next election, I question your level of intelligence. That's all I can say.
Well, there is a good topic to talk about. Maybe we'll save it for the next podcast, and that is when dictatorships do start to rise, there is dissent amongst the ranks. So there is a strong Labor Party, as we know. It controls a lot of the public servants, as we know, and controls a lot of areas. But there's going to be some dissent in the ranks. So we've already seen leadership being challenged, and that's going to be an interesting area to follow, that who stands up within that Labor Party.
I don't think we've seen anyone stand up.
No one challenge leadership?
No.
I think
Or they,
I think that's just
it's probably going
thinking.
back to say the leak of the roadmap, things like that, where it may give a perception that amongst the party they're losing confidence and
Someone spread a bit of someone spread a message going back a week or two ago that there was going to be a challenge and Tim Pallas was going to take over, and it all ended up being a fake email.
Yeah, I think
email.
I think there needs to be people standing up and actually standing up. But the rumours that we've heard and things like that, the roadmap was obviously leaked by someone that wasn't happy with.
You know what I found really.
He did guarantee that that was a draft, and it was the roadmap out was totally different. And I have to say, when he announced that he was going to make that roadmap announcement on Father's Day, it was the first time in 6 months I had, I saw a light at the end of the tunnel, and I had a little confidence in what was going to happen in the coming days, because I thought surely the bloke is not that heartless to make an announcement that would give us bad news on a day like Father's Day. After everything that everyone's been putting up with and sacrificed over the last 6 months.
Why would you think that, Adrian? I mean, the last time he let us out was the day after Mother's Day. He couldn't bring it forward 2 days.
I had hope.
He couldn't bring it forward 2 days like they did in New South Wales.
In the end, it was...
And say, look, we'll make it Friday so that you can all enjoy your Mother's Day with your mums. No.
Well, good news is we might have a good Boxing Day.
Daniel Andrews, you heartless, cruel bastard.
In the end, it was, I think, his ploy to create a bit of distraction amongst the news he was going to deliver. But I think the people of Victoria are much smarter and more interested in what he was going to say. So,
I reckon it is heartless, and I think what's happened here is
it's disgraceful.
With that roadmap, there are little things you can put in place. Like one good example, if you know this industry well, the real estate industry. They're pushing this week for one-on-one inspections, right? Safety to an absolute guarantee, right? It's 100% safe. One-on-one inspections of a home because their industry's crippled. Now, instead of Dan putting that in the roadmap, what he's done is almost waited a few weeks for the industry, real estate industry, to beg him, can you please open up?
That's what That's what he's done from the start. He announced that roadmap to nowhere, that's exactly what it was, because it went nowhere. There was no hope for any business. Hairdressers having to wait another 6 weeks, whatever it was, before they've even got an opportunity to not open, but think they can open, right? Beauty therapists told that they can't open until the 26th of November.
Restaurants, bars.
Restaurants, forget restaurants. If you don't have the capacity to entertain outdoors, forget it. You go to the shit house, right? Mm-hmm. That was the most disheartening news on probably one of the only days that we thought,
there might be some a rainbow at the end of it.
Correct.
There was no rainbow.
On a day like Father's Day.
Yep.
And all that was for those that are suffering mentally.
Yep.
That was a knife in the back, mate.
There was no rainbow at the end of it. It was just
that was a disgrace.
A black brick road, not a yellow brick road. Absolute it was disgrace. A black brick road to nowhere.
Yep.
Okay? And what you've got to understand yet again is how they think. All right? And even Brett Sutton, the Chief Health Officer, has confirmed some of this. A lot of the things that they are not allowing is not because of health advice. It's got nothing to do with whether it's dangerous or not.
That's what Dan
the priority is to keep everything closed. This is how they think. Shut everything except for what absolute minimum must be left open. To its absolute minimum. So what they're doing is whether it makes sense for a golf course to be open or not, or whether there's any health risks associated with letting people play golf is not the issue. And Brett Sutton's confirmed this. Does it need to be open? That's what they're thinking. Does this business or this organisation or this whatever it might be, does it have to be open? Yep. Is it essential to the well-being of the average person for this thing to be open? Now, when you look at golf courses, is it essential that people play golf? No, it's not. So they say, no, shut. Yep. Even though there's no health risk associated with it at all. Okay? So all they're looking at is what must remain open as a minimum, and that's all that can open. So you've got supermarkets, pharmacies. What else? Not much else?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're allowing cafes to open purely on takeaway. That's it. You've got to survive on takeaway cups of coffee. Now, that's all that they're allowing to be open. And of course, all of the factories and warehouses that supply the supermarkets and supply the chemists and whatever else that's open. So that's it. They're looking at it through the lens of, forget whether there's any health at risk associated with this. Do we have to have it open? That's all they're looking at. And if that means that these businesses go broke, unnecessarily, bad luck. That's what they're saying. That is the way they're looking at it.
That's where we see this consistent lack of, total disregard to livelihoods.
Yeah, of course. Look, why wouldn't you let anything stay open if it's not a health risk?
Correct.
Why not look at it the other way?
I think they've looked at this upside down, right?
Because he's trying
They're starting
to...
from...
in fairness to Andrews, he's told you straight. It's all about restricting movement. Restricting as many people from being outside of their houses as possible. So, in other words, I don't care if it means people are out of work. I don't care if it means businesses go broke. I don't care how many hundreds of thousands of people lose their job, so long as no one's moving.
And I don't care how much debt I put the state into.
Yeah. And the thing about it all is, if it wasn't for the total incompetent mismanagement of that hotel quarantine program, we all would be living exactly as they are in WA and South Australia and Queensland and New South Wales and Tasmania. We would all be living like that in Victoria as of about 3 months ago. So all of the measures that they're taking are measures that are being imposed on us because of their mistakes, their incompetence, and their botched up programs. And why did they make those decisions? Yet again, what did I say to you earlier? What is the Labor Party all about? What's in it for the unions? So why do you think they went with private security guards? Owned by union mates. All comes down to what's in our buddies that run the Labor Party, our faceless people behind the scenes. Oh, he's got a security company, use his.
That's what I wanted to get to next, was how we actually got to this point in the first place, because
and yet there's all
we're looking at the rest of Australia here that it seemed to be continuing on with life to some extent. Still not to the capacity that I think is required. But, it did start. Obviously, we saw the BLM protest that was allowed to go ahead early on in the days, and we were told that, I think they told us early on that only 3 cases were traced back to that protest, and then weeks after that we found out that they were linked back to the BLM protest. So how many cases of that came out? We'll never hear that. It followed then on to the hotel debacle with the quarantine, which slowly they're doing a good job at pushing that aside. But that's what's got it. That is the reason why we're here today, why we're still in lockdown, why we're prisoners and bound to our home. Is because of the inept government, the total incompetence of the Victorian Labor government.
Well, how about some more? Do you want to hear another double standard?
Well, I just want to, still on this hotel quarantine, before we stray off that, but people, it's like a Stockholm syndrome that they're suffering from in Victoria, and they'll continue to support him and back him up with his decisions. And, you hear every day, but how was it his fault that the security guards were sleeping with the
return travellers.
The return travellers and letting them go. How's that his fault? Well, you know what? When you're in a global pandemic, and this pandemic is as lethal and as deadly as we're being told, right? Because it's the same people that allowed a private security company to take control and own responsibility, right, of the deadly pandemic that was at hand. He allowed a private company to take our lives as their responsibility.
And by the way, there was no tender process for that. You know that, don't you?
Of course.
There was no tender process.
They had no training.
Just ask them.
No training whatsoever. Right?
Oh, no. They did get training. They had inclusion and diversity training.
That's bullshit.
Nothing to do with safety and security.
Now, to support his decision and say that it wasn't his fault is absolutely pathetic. When you've got a global pandemic at hand, which was unknown at the time, how lethal it was going to become. For all we knew, could have wiped out half the blood. Well, they were predicting 150 deaths in Australia.
150,000.
150,000, sorry. Now, if it was so deadly, you do not take chance, right, and put lives at risk in any way, shape or form. You do not leave it up to a private security company.
But again, why did they make that decision? Because the health and safety and welfare of the average Victorian is not at the top of the priority list. The top of the priority list in any Labor discussion, in any Labor Party, is what's in it for us, what's in it for our backers, what's in it for the union movement. That's why those decisions were made. They were offered ADF support. It's been proven now that the Premier has been flat out lying to all of us, right?
And they still can't see beyond it.
And yet, even as much as today, Andrews was asked in his press conference, do you now concede about the hotel quarantine program and how the ADF was offered? No, I stand by my answers. I mean, it's like catching someone who's got his pants down.
I'm not going to talk about that today.
Right? with another partner that he's having an affair with, and he's got his pants pulled down. He said, no, it wasn't me. No, I wasn't doing anything. That's what he's like. He's been proven to have lied. He won't concede to it. He will not take responsibility.
Yeah, but the fact that people still support that decision.
But the decision was made because of what's in it for the unions, what's in it for our backers. Why do you think the Cedar Meats scandal?
I was going to touch on that. Cedar Meats now. They were allowed to stay open after knowing they had an outbreak. They were allowed to stay open for another month, pump out triple production, right?
Yep.
To pump out as much meat as they can.
Yeah, that's right.
Before he had to close them down. Before there was no way he could hide it any longer and shut them down.
Hey, Rich, how would you feel if you'd been fined $1,652, right, for so-called flouting the rules because you decided to take your dog for a walk at 9 o'clock at night, and yet these people that have been caught in that so-called cluster around Hallam and Berwick and Narre Warren, they're not finding any of them. Yeah. They're not finding any of those people who have been proven to have flouted and broken the rules, not because they just felt like going for a walk. They knew and they all had the virus and they still did not stop that virus from spreading. So it's a blatant spreading of the virus. Oh, no, we don't want to find them.
Well, did you hear his answer?
Well, I'm telling you, it's all because they're all part of the Afghan community apparently. And he doesn't want to. I mean, what else can you assume other than I don't want to lose the votes of the Afghan community?
Yeah, but his answer was that no, I don't want to find them because they've come out and admitted the right thing, and we don't want to show that we're doing the wrong thing by just finding them. So
okay,
yeah, but that's
rubbish. Yeah.
Well, then, I'm sorry. You either fine everyone or you fine no one. You can't have different rules for different people, especially when the ones you're letting off are the ones that are actually spreading the virus. And the ones that are not spreading the virus and just happen to have done something that, overreached the rules that you've put in place, like taking my dog for a walk at 10 o'clock at night. Oh, if they catch me, it's $1,650.
Yeah.
Oh, no, you've got to pay. Even though you haven't got the virus and even though you're on your own, you happen to be outside of your residence at 10 o'clock at night. You've got a $1,650 fine.
Well, there's people that are...
Well, then why shouldn't those people in Hallam and Narre Warren be fined not only for breaching the rules but actually... flouting the rules knowingly with coronavirus all in their system.
Yep. No,
that is an absolute disgrace and a double standard yet again. Yep. Yet again. I mean, it's stifling how hypocritical these people are. How can they stand there and say, oh, no, those people shouldn't be fined? It's the same thing about Black Lives Matter protests versus people who are actually protesting about these draconian laws.
Human rights.
Yeah. You know what he said about... I don't care about human rights.
Human rights. And he'll call, and he's called publicly those people for protesting for human rights. Oh. He's called them stupid.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And the police. Police have denigrated and
how is it stupid? People. How is it stupid to protest for your basic human rights, but it is not stupid to go and kneel down or protest for a dangerous criminal just because he's a man of colour?
Okay, because he's a black man and he got allegedly killed by a white cop, okay? The whole world's got to go berserk over it, right? I say, by all means, get the white cop and charge him, and if he's acted improperly, charge him, take his badge off him and put him in prison. But why should that mean that the whole world's got to all of a sudden
We've got his
go into meltdown, including all of these stupid moron footballers and soccer players who are going down on one knee every time they play football.
There's painted murals of this George Floyd as if he's
make me sick.
You know,
it makes me sick. Statues getting ripped down.
It's ridiculous.
You want to see more hypocrisy?
Some noble human being. Cannon Hinnant. He was a 5-year-old boy. And actually only the night before, his father noticed that his neighbour was seemed upset. He seemed a bit down, so the father invited him over. I think they had a couple of drinks, and it was only the next day that his 5-year-old son was out in the front yard, and he was shot by the neighbour, who was a black man. He was shot execution style. Now that news story, if that's not heartbreaking, I don't know what is. For a 5-year-old, but what could possibly
Where's
be
the worldwide
reason,
outrage?
right?
That's what I want to know. Where
for
is
a 5-year-old boy to be shot
outrage?
execution style, and we hear nothing of it?
No.
Because it's a black man
Who killed him?
who killed a white boy, innocent boy. We hear nothing of it. People had to go digging for that story.
Yep.
It's been spread on social media. It's got nowhere else. It's got no further.
Yep.
How a story like that did not get the airtime or the coverage is, I've got my boy's 5. And to think of a kid that age being executed, it's unbelievable. I find it
about the
pathetic.
Australian
What I
woman?
find more pathetic than anything is the fact that inhumane organisation and movement they call Black Lives Matter has not made one
Marxist
fucking
terrorist?
comment on it.
Yep. Marxist terrorist
That's the big.
organisation.
If they were true to their word and about a true movement that they think is going to benefit the world, they'd be the first to fucking comment on that story.
No. They're not about that. They have actually come out, and you can see it on YouTube.
It's disgrace.
Their organisers and their founders have even come out and admitted as much.
Complete silence.
That they are Marxists, trained Marxists. Now, for any of you out there that might be wondering what the hell's Marxists mean, Karl Marx. If you want to educate yourself a little bit, Google Karl Marx, M-A-R-X. Okay? He is the founder, effectively, of that left-wing, far left-wing communist concept of government. And these people want to impose Marxism in every Western country that exists right now, which is currently based on a capitalist society. They want to destroy capitalism. That's the real agenda. All of these other so-called agendas, whether it be climate change, whether it be black lives that are being, sacrificed by white police and all this sort of business, defunding the police, it's all part of bringing society to its knees.
Safe schools as well.
Safe schools program's another example of that here in Victoria.
It's a disgrace.
I mean, these are the real reasons that they are in existence. These groups, it's like the Greens. The Greens used to be the party of the environment, the ones who want to keep the trees from falling down.
Now they're
They are way beyond saving trees. They are what a lot of people refer to as watermelons. They're green on the outside, but they're red on the inside, because ultimately they are communists and they want to impose a Marxist socialist utopia on the whole country. You would have had to deal with a few in your time, Rich.
Yeah, no, I do. We're heading in the wrong direction, and I'm glad that we're all speaking up loudly on this because it has to be addressed.
And that just goes to show you how pathetic, how disgusting, how disgraceful the left-wing biased media is in America, Australia, the United Kingdom, New Zealand, everywhere. All I can say is this. If you want to know who's balancing up the media, doing his best, it's the one that the left wing hate the most. Who are they outraged by more than any other person in the media?
Rupert Murdoch.
Rupert Murdoch.
Yeah.
And thank God for Rupert Murdoch.
I agree.
And God help us the day he goes, because if his sons don't carry on his legacy of keeping it balanced, we're all finished. Yeah. Because if our lives are going to be dominated by a purely left-wing media, we're all gone. Forget it. Finished. Kaput. Yeah. Murdoch is the only one that gives the alternative point of view.
The scariest thing about that, though, is that the only way we can, for those who can't afford or don't have pay TV,
that's the problem.
Yeah.
is that it's all Sky News and it's all pay TV.
It's hidden from you.
I'd love Murdoch to own Channel 7 or Channel 9 or Channel 10 because someone needs to provide the alternative point of view. If you watch Channel 10, all you get to watch is that absolute bullshit on The Project hosted by those lefty little elites like Peter Van Onselen and Lisa Wilkinson and Waleed the Weed Ali, okay? They are pathetic the way they go on about their left-wing agenda.
Yeah.
Channels 7 and 9, again, you might argue that there's a bit of balance.
I think there's a little bit of balance. The problem is it's selective news.
It's selective.
And
it's what they don't report.
Which is the stuff we need to know.
Which is what we need.
How Adolf Hitler took full control was he got control of the media, spread propaganda, spread fear, had absolute control, and it just kept going.
Yep. And by the way, one of our future podcasts I want to discuss is the education departments of this country.
Oh, I think it's probably...
Because there's a lot... when it comes to what our kids are learning...
I think that's what we've seen.
What our kids are learning, that's got to stop too. And they're being pumped with rubbish.
And that's including my generation. I think it's happened for years.
Yep.
That even the importance of probably having a stronger focus on economics and the importance of that in our lives, I think is very important.
That is what people have to wake up to. This is one of the reasons that we've decided to do this podcast, is we're trying to educate a lot of people, not just on our point of view, it's actually to give you the facts. Think about this, okay? All I would ask anyone to do is not to automatically accept my point of view or Adrian's point of view or Richard's point of view. Think about what we're telling you. Think if it makes sense to you now as to why Daniel Andrews, for example, is imposing this curfew, is imposing these lockdowns. Because it doesn't make sense to the average person. Why should you be absolutely crucifying small and medium-sized business to this extent? It's the longest lockdown in the world, and yet our numbers are not a piss in the ocean compared to some of those countries. And yet we've got to have a lockdown to this extent? What's really behind it? Ask yourself, should I just accept what these government representatives tell me? Should I just accept what the police tells me? Or should I look beyond what they're telling me and look at the real agenda?
I haven't seen from many people, the exercising of common sense. Like it seems the government is so out of touch, so illogical and so stubborn.
Because they're not going to move.
And reluctant to accept advice. So there was a group of, I think, over 600 doctors that formed was going to be, they wanted to form a panel to offer advice to the Victorian government on the situation we've got at hand.
If you're open-minded, you'd listen to it, wouldn't you? He hasn't listened to any of it.
He's listened to nothing that isn't coming from his own ministers and his own officers.
Does not care.
That's 600 of the country's best doctors putting their names on the line.
Adrian, when on August the 2nd, when Daniel Andrews had a press conference on Sunday, the 2nd of August, and told everyone with 4 hours' notice that we're going to now be under a curfew as of 8 o'clock tonight, you look back on it. The press conference on Sunday, the 2nd of August, no one knew it until he announced it. There's going to be a curfew as of tonight. Since then, even to his credit, what's his name, Chief Commissioner Patton, came out. Was it Patton? Is that his name? Shane Patton? He came out and said, we only got word of this 2 or 3 hours beforehand. Do you know what he said at that press conference? We are making these changes on medical advice. It has since come out, thanks to Neil Mitchell and an interview he did with Brett Sutton, the Chief Health Officer or Medical Officer, who said, well, no, that wasn't a decision that was made with my knowledge or my, it was nothing to do with me. That was a separate decision pathway, he called it. In other words, I had nothing to do with it. It wasn't based on my recommendation or my advice. He went on to say, oh, look, it's not something I disagree with, or, it's, I can understand why he's done it. He's trying to backtrack.
Well, I think he was...
The point is it was never imposed on his recommendation.
I think he didn't want to be tarnished.
Basically let the cat out of the bag that Andrews lied to us again. On the 2nd of August, when he said it was on medical advice, it had nothing to do with medical advice. So when that was put to him, what did he say? Oh, no, it was done for the benefit of Victoria Police so that they could administer these rules a lot easier. What has Patton come out and said? No one asked me. I wasn't consulted. Had nothing to do with police advice. So then what has he said? Oh, well, I don't know who came up with the idea. I don't recall the exact discussion or who made the suggestion. But anyway, so long as it benefits the police, and there's no question, of course, there's absolutely no doubt that this is all helping the police to administer these rules a lot easier. So that's why we're going ahead with it. And that's why there's a woman now in the Mornington Peninsula who runs a business, who's basically gone broke, who's taking legal action, against the government for administering the lockdown and the curfew because it was not done on legal advice. And that's come out in the media, on recorded live interviews. And so therefore now the Victorian taxpayer may very well, if she succeeds, may very well have to fork out many more millions of dollars if she happens to win that court case. And I say good luck to her.
Absolutely.
Because
I actually think
that could actually open up a whole Pandora's box of other businesses that sue the government.
if we've got any listeners to this podcast, this episode, I'd love to do a phone in with, obviously I'm a small business owner myself, but I think that'd be a bit biased because we know where I stand. But if we did a phone-in interview with a small business owner somewhere who wanted to express some views and tell us what it's been, especially I think someone in the hospitality industry would be great to hear
Well, if
from.
you're listening to us now and you run a small business, you want to have a say, let us know.
Just with that woman on the Mornington Peninsula, she's up against it though, because the lawyers, the big law firms, they're all on the left.
Yep.
You said she's going on the media. We've already said the media are towards the left. So hopefully someone
But yet again, do you think that Daniel Andrews cares about how many millions of dollars in legal fees this is going to cost the Victorian taxpayer?
Credit card.
Yep. So
It's not his money. Even if they lose,
It's ours.
it's our money.
And that's actually a good way to get people to understand. The money that is being spent,
None of theirs.
it's ours.
Yeah.
As Victorians,
Yeah.
this is our money.
Yep.
Right? And I think because it
They are
doesn't
custodians of our
necessarily come out of your bank account or your wallet,
You don't feel
this is
it.
where people create this, detachment from the economy. This money that is being spent, this debt,
Yep.
as long as you are a Victorian or as long as you are an Australian,
Yep.
this debt is ours. This money that is being spent is ours.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Beyond the Political Spin. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Stay connected. Follow us on social media at Beyond Political Spin.